Starbucks is the largest coffee shop chain in the world. Brazil is the largest exporter and the second biggest coffee consumer on the planet. It seems like a perfect combination at first glance. You look and think there's no way Starbucks could go wrong here. But in October 2023, the brand's operator filed for bankruptcy protection, reporting a debt of 1.8 billion reais, an absurd contrast to the $1.22 billion in profit that the chain had globally just in the fourth quarter of 2023. And for those who don't know, a company files for bankruptcy protection precisely to block the collection of its debts for 6 months and have time to present a plan to renegotiate their payment, to get back to operating without the risk of going straight to bankruptcy. Starbucks in total operates more than 35,000 stores in 80 countries. The question that remains is how the largest coffee shop chain in the world is failing in the second largest coffee consuming country on the planet. Starbucks was founded in 1971, and even though its main product is a commodity, it managed to popularize a new way of drinking coffee. Its stores gained popularity because Starbucks promotes itself not just as a place to have a simple cup of coffee, but as a comfortable space where, besides being able to have a customized coffee, you can have a meeting, a small business gathering, study, and even work. That's what they call the Starbucks experience. All of this is intended to create customer loyalty. It didn't become the biggest coffee shop in the world by accident. Starbucks was the pioneer in promoting coffee shop culture on a global level. In 1996, after already having explored the American domestic market with more than 100 stores, Starbucks began its expansion process outside North America. Starbucks' strategy for entering international markets was, and still is, varied. China became its second largest market with more than 6,000 stores, second only to the United States, which has almost 16,000. Starbucks began dominating the Chinese market with a licensing agreement and joint ventures in 1998. But in 2017, Starbucks bought out its last partner, Joy Venture, for $1.3 billion. And after that, it became the only market where the brand owns 100% of its stores. Not even in the United States does this happen, where 59% of the stores are company-owned. In Brazil, Starbucks arrived here in 2006 through a joint venture with Brazilian investors. The company was controlled by Café Cereais do Brasil, which held 51% of the business. The American headquarters owned the other 49%. But already in 2010, the operation came to be fully controlled by Starbucks. However, since then, it hasn't managed to grow much. Though Brazilians are the world's second largest coffee consumers, most stores have only expanded in the São Paulo, Rio de Janeiro area. Until in 2018, Starbucks sold all its operations in Brazil to Sotiroc, a private equity fund that owns Brazil airport restaurants. Sotiroc, under the agreement, took over the operation for 20 years. Until then, when Starbucks still managed the operation, they had opened 113 stores. When the agreement with Sotiroc was closed, there was a lot of optimism. The consulting firm Euromonitor estimated a 27.6% growth for the Brazilian coffee market, and at the time, it was said that Starbucks had the potential for 500 stores just in the city of São Paulo. Sotiroc even managed to expand operations to Santa Catarina, the Federal District, Rio Grande do Sul, Paraná, and Minas Gerais. But in 2023, shortly before filing for bankruptcy protection, Starbucks had 187 stores in Brazil, an average growth of about 14 stores per year, which is much lower than expected for such a promising market. But what caused such poor performance here in our country? In Sotiroc's own document, they claim that their operations were harmed by the high instability in the country, the volatility of interest rates, and constant currency fluctuations. In 2020, Sotiroc reported a 95% drop in sales amid the economic crisis caused by the pandemic. The following year, the drop reached 70%, and in 2022, 30%. In other words, 3 years of astronomical sales drops destroyed Starbucks' cash flow, which could barely pay the rent. On November 6, the Casper Libero Foundation, for example, filed an eviction lawsuit against Starbucks for a debt of $1.3 million in overdue rent. Since the end of October 2023, 43 stores have been closed in São Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, and Porto Alegre. Getting working capital from banks was another difficulty pointed out by Sotiroc, especially after the Selic rate went from 2% in 2020 to around 12% in 2023. It's true, there's no denying that the pandemic really drained Starbucks' cash flow, but we can't say that's the only reason it's failing in our country. For some analysts, Starbucks also faces growing competition in the country in the segment aimed at higher income classes, with the rise of brands like Copenhagen, Nespresso, Havana, and the coffee. In the coffee shop sector, Starbucks' operation is expensive because it focuses on opening its stores in shopping malls, airports, and high-end buildings. Just because all 6 tables in a store, for example, are full of young people talking, reading, or working on their laptops doesn't mean the company is making a lot of money. Sometimes a person spends hours in the coffee shop just to have an espresso and a piece of cake. In Brazil, about 90% of coffee is consumed in the traditional way, at home or in a bakery in a small glass. Only about 5% to 10% of the market is made up of premium coffee. Although premium coffee consumption is growing more, traditional coffee consumption has also continued to grow. Maybe for 2 reasons. One is that the price of premium coffee is expensive, or because Brazilians are still very attached to drinking their simple hot black coffee at home. Who hasn't visited someone's house and immediately been offered coffee? Whether we like it or not, this is part of our culture. When I was a teenager, going to Starbucks and leaving with a cup with your name on it to take a picture was a status symbol, and Starbucks really presents itself that way. It positions itself as a brand that represents prosperity and success. In other words, the reach of customers compared to the United States, Canada, and England, for example, is much greater than in a country that is still considered third world with very low purchasing power, like Brazil. And after the pandemic, consumption patterns never returned to what they were before, even for upper middle class families. Food and financial insecurity affected a huge part of the Brazilian population. Buying a premium coffee at Starbucks is not going to be a priority, with things being as expensive as they are. Honestly, I'm not even close to being a coffee taster, so my opinion about the taste is irrelevant. But this coffee expert talked a bit about the quality of Starbucks coffee.
Sometimes I brew a coffee and forget about it, then after about 10 minutes I go to drink it again and it's cold and almost terrible. I think to myself, what a horrible thing.
But that's because it's bad coffee, of course.
The coffee?
Good coffee, when it's cold, it's even tastier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
That's why at Starbucks there's a bunch of iced coffee. That's good. Starbucks is bad. Let's root for Starbucks. Now, Kayo, please read. Starbucks is bad for coffee?
Look, it might be good, but I've never had any good coffee there.
I've tried several there.
Of course, wow, oh my god.
Starbucks has also already failed in Australia for several reasons, but mainly, as this CNBC video and the comments from Australians in it say, they didn't adapt to the traditional coffee there and couldn't beat out local coffee shops which already knew the Australians' consumption habits very well. This is the old problem that multinationals always face when entering a new market. The attempt to replicate what worked in their home country is not always the perfect formula for success. On the other hand, shopping habits, socializing, sports, and even the way people drink coffee are different in every corner of the world. The states of São Paulo, Minas Gerais, Bahia, and Rio Grande do Sul each have their own different ways and customs, for example, when it comes to making both barbecue and coffee. Starbucks also wasn't able to grow in Vietnam's $1 billion coffee shop market. Local coffee shops have overshadowed any attempt by the American chain to expand its business there. With these examples, it becomes a bit clearer that Starbucks has serious difficulties growing in countries that already have a well-established coffee culture. In China, which is its largest international market, it is growing rapidly, opening a store every 9 hours, precisely because it knew very well how to first adapt to the strong tea drinking culture of the Chinese and also to form partnerships with small local coffee shops. In summary, I believe that the failure of Starbucks, quote unquote, because it can still recover in our country, was very similar to the failure of Walmart here. It's the failed attempt to replicate a business model in countries with completely different cultures. That was my humble analysis, and you're free to disagree or add something here in the comments. If you dream of making a living from YouTube without even having to show up and earning almost 1,000 reais a day, just like my channel, just click the first link in the description. It's the best way for you to shorten the path, and to have and learn from the top authority on the subject in Brazil, who will teach you how to launch a channel and achieve financial freedom working online in the shortest time possible. If you're interested, click the first link in the description. See you in the next video.